Chapter 5, book of 2 Kings, it says, Now Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Syria, was great and an honorable man in the eyes of his master, because by him the Lord had given victory to Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but a leper. And the Syrians had gone out on raids and had brought back captive a young girl from the land of Israel. And she waited on Naaman's wife and said to her mistress, If only my master were with the prophet who is in Samaria, for he would heal him of his leprosy. And Naaman went and told his master, saying, Thus and thus says the girl whom is from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Well then go. Go now, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And so he departed, and he took with him 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 changes of clothing. Then he brought the letter to the king of Israel and said, Now be advised, when this letter comes to you, that I have sent Naaman, my servant, to you, that you may heal him of leprosy. And it happened, when the king of Israel read the letter, that he tore his clothes, and he said, Am I God to kill and to make alive, that this man sends a man to me to heal of his leprosy? Therefore, please consider and see how he seeks a quarrel with me. So it was, when Elisha the man of God heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Please let him come to me, so that he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. Then Naaman went with his horses and chariot, and he stood at the door of Elisha's house. And Elisha sent a message out to him, saying, Go and wash in the Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall be restored to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman became furious. And he went away and said, Indeed, I said to myself, He will surely come out to me and stand and call upon the name of his God, and wave his hand over the place and heal the leprosy. Are not the Abana and Pharpar River in Damascus better than the waters of Israel? Could I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and he went away angry. And his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do something great, would you not have done it? How much more then when he says for you to wash and be clean? So he went down. And he dipped 7 times in the Jordan River, and according to the saying of the man of God, his flesh was restored like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. Interesting story. Interesting account of what was really, in many ways, an enemy of God, but yet sought God and God's healing for his own life. Here we see Elisha working, and this time Naaman, this general of the Syrian army. And it's interesting to me that the king of Syria would send to the king of Israel with such a request. Now remember, the relationship between Syria and Israel, and we'll see it all the way through, was not good. They quarreled and they fought continually. They went back and forth. But here what we see is this amazing aspect of Ben-Hadad taking and sending this letter asking the king of Israel to heal his top military man. Now you can imagine the king of Israel was not real happy. Have you ever anybody ask you to do something that you know was not in your power to do? Have you ever had anybody ask you to do something that you knew you couldn't possibly pull off, and so the only thing you could imagine was that they were only asking you to do it in order for you to fail? This is what the king of Israel thinks right now. He thinks, man, Ben-Hadad is just setting me up to fail. He's picking a quarrel. He's picking a fight. He wants me not to be able to do this. And how incredibly and amazingly wrong is it of him to ask in the first place? But then, hello. But then, hello. But then, hello. She's hiding over. You know, it's interesting, though, but I believe that this happens more often than we think. I think that there are those in the world that will come to the people of God to seek healing more often than we would really recognize. They come knowing that there is the potential there, that there is something there, and they're seeking the healing of God. But yet, so often, I think the response that they get from God's people is, what do you want from me? You expect me to be able to do something for you? You expect, no. We shouldn't expect us to be able to do anything for anybody, but we should have a high expectation that God can. We should have a very high expectation that God is capable of doing that. And in this case, what's amazing is that Elisha has no problem seeing that God can. And Elisha says, hey, send him over here. Well, it wasn't because Elisha was confident in Elisha. Elisha was confident in God. He said, send this guy over. We'll see what's happening. But in order for it to take place, in order for the healing to work in Naaman's life, Naaman has to be willing to do something that we see Naaman is not at first willing to do. He has to humble himself before the Lord. He has to come to the place of being willing to be humbled by doing something that he sees that is beneath him. Well, the first thing is that he goes to the house of this great prophet, and he knocks on the door, and he announces that he's there, and I'm here to be healed. Bring on the prophet. And Elisha sends out a servant. Go tell him to take a bath in the Jordan. Go tell him to dip 7 times in the Jordan River. And Naaman gets bent out of shape. Why? Because he thought that he deserved a more illustrious audience with the prophet than just a messenger. He had healing in mind, but he only wanted to be healed in the way that he wanted to be healed. Surely this guy's going to come out, he's going to pray to his God, he's going to invoke his God's name, and then he's going to wave his arms over me and light some candles and blow some smoke, and I'm going to be healed. That was Naaman's idea of how it was that this healing was going to happen. And when it didn't happen that way, it says he got mad. Have you ever got mad when God didn't do something the way you wanted him to do it? God, I have a plan. I have a vision. Just follow my plan. Do it my way. It's interesting, though. The healing is going to take place. It's going to only take place through humility. And this is the same way that the world has to come to God, guys. And understand, the world right now, in the picture that we see and what's going on, and even those that are professing Christianity are wanting to come to God on their terms. God, you need to accept my healing, my salvation, my way. Regardless of if it's against what your word says, you need to accept it, and you need to promote it, and you need to allow it, because this is the way I want to be healed. Because you see, leprosy was just as much of a death sentence as is our lives without Christ. It's a sign of decay, of rot, of death, of no hope, and of hopelessness. And this is exactly where the world is right now, that is coming to God and saying, hey, we want to be healed, but only if we can be healed our way. And we have to be careful as Christians. Because as much as we would want to see those in the world healed, we have to be careful that we don't shy away from what is the only means of salvation, and as simple as it is, that we don't convolute it by somehow compromising into what the world would have it to be. Salvation is so simple, guys. It's so simple that a child can understand it. It happens only by faith in Jesus Christ. Nothing else. No other way, no other name by which can anyone call or claim salvation, but yet there's many that will try. He returned to the man of God. He and all of his aides, and they came and they stood before him. And indeed, now I know that there is no God on earth except in Israel. Now therefore, please take a gift from your servant. But he said, Elisha said, as the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will not receive, or I will receive nothing. And he urged him to take it, but he still refused. Now Naaman's reaction is very, very common. This is an expected reaction. I mean, he's just been healed of leprosy, and now he wants to show his appreciation for not only the God that healed him, but for the man of God that he sees God working through. And so he brings this gift, and he wants to provide it. And again, Elisha is sharp enough to know, I didn't really have anything to do with this. God chose to heal this individual. He chose to do what he did. And so therefore, I'm not going to touch anything. There's nothing that he has that I want. There's not anything that I should take and receive for this. because all of the praise, all of the glory, all the honor needs to go to God. And I'm sorry to say that it's not that way with all of the servants of God. I mean, as a matter of fact, it's interesting because either I don't have the channels on my limited network here, which is a good thing, but when we travel, we wind up being in different cities and locations, and they'll have those television channels that go over to the bizarre Christian realm of big hair. God said that you need to send me money. And it's like, you've got to be. I mean, I can't believe it's that blatant. I mean, hopefully none of you guys are watching any of that stuff, but if you see it, it will just, I want to like shoot the TV, man. I want to like throw a rock through it or so. It's like, you've got to be, I can't believe that somebody's standing up there doing that. That is using the gospel, using the message of salvation as a means by which to enrich themselves. Be careful. Elisha's smart enough to realize that he's not going to receive. And so Naaman said to him, if not that, then please let your servant be given 2 mule loads of earth. For your servant will no longer offer either burnt offering or sacrifice to other gods, but to the Lord. Yet in this thing may the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the temple of Rimmon to worship there and leans on my hand, and I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, when I bow down in the temple of Rimmon, may the Lord please pardon your servant in this thing. See, Naaman's healing is complete, man. He is a true believer. He gets it. He understands so much so that he says, I want to pack dirt from this place back home so I can build a place to make sacrifices to the one true and living God. And then for some reason or another, his mind drifts to his responsibilities for the king back home, and he goes, ooh, I'm going to have to still follow the king into his house of worship of this false god. And when he goes to bow down, I got to bow down with him because he puts his hand on my shoulder in order to bend down and in order to kneel. Hey, can I get absolution for this before that happens the next time? Is it okay if I have to do that? You know, and the reality is it sounds funny and it sounds hard, but it's very sincere. I've had people come to me and say, I really believe in and I accept Jesus Christ. However, I'm living in the household of a non-believer, or I'm living in the household of someone who has a different belief. And in order to be able to live there, because most of the time it's younger people that are under the authority of moms and dads or of a father who insists on them participating in something else. And they say, is it okay that I go into this situation? And I don't mean to. I don't want to. My heart's not in it. My heart's right. My heart's where it's supposed to go. But is it okay? And I think it's interesting what Elisha tells him. He said, go in peace. Basically, he said, yeah, I understand. It's okay. He didn't tell him, nope, you need to make a stand. Go back and tell the king that he's so far out of line that you're not going to do that. And 60 seconds after he cuts your head off, then you'll know that there's a God in heaven. It's not a problem. So he departed. Then Gehazi, the servant of Elijah, the man of God, said, look, my master has spared Naaman, the Syrian, while not receiving from his hands what he brought. But as the Lord lives, I will run after him, and I will take something from him. So Gehazi pursued Naaman, and when Naaman saw him coming, running after him, he got down from the chariot to meet him, and he said, hey, is everything all right? I'm going to start paraphrasing here, guys, just so you know. We're going to go through a lot of scripture tonight. And he said, all is well. He said, but my master, indeed, just now, 2 young men of the sons of the prophet have come to me and from the mountains of Ephraim. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of garments. So Naaman said, oh, hey, take 2. They're small. Please take 2 talents. And he urged him to bound 2 talents of silver into bags with 2 changes of garments, and handed them to them, or to 2 of his servants, and they carried them ahead of him. And when he had come to the citadel, he took them from their hand, he stored them away in the house, and then he let them go, and they departed. A common problem when it comes to human nature. Elisha had no problem turning away a gift from Naaman, realizing that it was glory and honor that belonged to the Lord, and nothing was to fall into his hand. But his servant Gehazi, he couldn't go along with it. He just started looking at all the missed opportunities that were right in front of him. Here's this Naaman guy. A Syrian brought all kinds of gold and silver. And it's interesting because we can't relate to 10 changes of garments. in our culture because clothes are way too easy to come by. You know, I mean, if we need clothes, we just go buy them. We shop for them. We find them. I mean, I get most of my clothes at Goodwill. I do. It's great. Yeah, I try to stay away from Walmart for clothes. But Goodwill's a great place. You know, you can go in there and you can find stuff nobody ever wore, and it's hanging on the rack for $1.50. Now I do have some nice clothes, but I don't wear them very often. But this idea of garments as being something of valuable, it really was. If you had 2 garments of clothes as an individual in this time and day, you were considered to be fairly well off. Most people lived in their clothes. One set. But it's interesting, it still amazes me how it is that this servant of Elisha runs after him, makes up a story, says that his master Elisha had sent him, and oh, by the way, it's not for him and it's not for me, it's for these 2 other guys. These 2 other guys just showed up and they have some needs. They need some clothes and they need a little bit of traveling money. And I believe that in some way, even in his own mind, he might have at some point thought that he was justifying what it was that he was doing, the ends justifying the means, that it's a good thing, and maybe if I do lay this stuff up, the next time somebody needs a little bit, then I'll have it for them. I mean, it's not really mine to take, but if I come by it and if I have it, then I can certainly use it later on. And you know, we got to be careful with that because very often I find that people will have some sort of idea that if God would just bless them with something above and beyond, if God would just make them wealthy, that somehow or another that would make them good stewards and make them to honor God. I've had people actually come to me and tell me that I'm expecting a large amount of money coming my way. My ship's going to come in. Ed McMahon's in the driveway. The check from Publishers Clearinghouse is here. Whatever it may be, is it okay for me to continue to play the mega machine down at Slot World in order to be able to give money to the Lord? Yeah. Or I'm going to enter this business deal, or I'm going to sell this, or I'm going to do this. And so very often what happens when people come to me with these types of things, I'll ask them, I'll say, well, what are you doing for the Lord right now? How faithful are you in the things that you have right now? I mean, I understand you have this great big vision. You have this great big dream. If I can just get a hold of this money, the ship's coming in, the check's in the mail, it's going to be fabulous. And I say, well, what are you doing with the check you've already got? What are you doing with what you have in your hand? Well, I can't do anything right now. But as soon as this money comes in, I'm going to get busy for the Lord. It's going to be great. It's going to be wonderful. And then normally they don't like my response. He who is faithful in the little things, God will make master over much. If you're not faithful in the little things, if you can't manage what little bit that God has given you right now, what makes you think He's going to give you more to mismanage? I mean, it's really interesting. And they look at me and they go, well, what do you mean? I said, well, if you're not able to take and to serve the Lord with what He's given you right now, what makes you think, God will only give you what you can handle? Oh, but I thought that only meant bad things. No, it means good things too. It means if you're expecting a big amount of blessing to come your way, God's only going to give it to you if you can handle it. And if you can't handle it, why would He? Then I ask them, are you a parent? Well, and sometimes they are, most of the time. I said, let me ask you a question. If one of your kids squandered everything that you gave them, was not faithful in doing the things that they were supposed to do, spent money recklessly, tore up resources, broke everything you gave them, would you give them even more to see if they could do better? You're talking about me, aren't you? No, I'm talking about God's children. But in this case, Gehazi is really just greedy. He wants it for himself, and we'll see that because he's already figuring out how to spend it in his heart and his mind. And now he went and he stood before his master, Elisha, in 25. Elisha said, where did you go? And he said, I didn't go anywhere. Then he said, did not my heart go with you when the man turned around in his chariot to meet you? Is it time to receive money and to receive clothing and olive groves and vineyards and sheep and oxen and male and female servants. What? It just got bigger. See, Elijah knew that this guy was thinking about what he could do with the money. Oh, man, I can buy an olive field, and I can buy an orchard, and I can hire servants. I can be on top of the world. I'll get all these things for me. Won't this be wonderful? Therefore, the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. And went out from his presence leprous, as white as snow. And the sons of the prophet said to Elijah, see now, the place that we dwell with you is too small, so please let us go to the Jordan and make every man a beam from there, and let us make there a place where we can dwell. So he answered, and he said, go. And then they said, well, please come with us. And he answered, yes, I'll go with you. So they went down, and when they came to the Jordan, they were cutting trees. And as one was cutting down a tree, the iron axe head fell into the water. And he cried out and said, alas. You remember that from last time? Alas. It's all over. End of the world. My axe head's in the water. He says, no, because it was borrowed. So the man of God said, where did it fall? He showed him in a place, and he cut off a stick, and he threw it there. And he made the iron float. Therefore he said, pick it up for yourself. And so he reached out his hand and he took it. Now, the king of Syria was making war against Israel, and he consulted with his servants, saying, my camp will be in such and such a place. And the man of God sent to the king of Israel, saying, beware that you do not pass this place, for the Syrians are coming down there. Then the king of Israel sent someone to the place of which the man of God had told him. Thus he warned him, and he was watchful there, not just once or twice. Therefore the heart of the king of Syria was greatly troubled by this thing, and he called all of his servants together, and he said, will you show me which one of us is for the king of Israel? Now, if you're wondering what's going on, it's real simple. Syria's plotting. They're hiding out. They're going to set a trap for the king of Israel, and Elisha sends a messenger and says, hey, don't go down to the Stagecoach side of the valley. Don't go to Stagecoach. Stay away from Stagecoach. And then don't go to Silver Springs, because they're out there too, and make sure you stay away from. And the king sends out servants, and sure enough, that's where they were hiding. So much so that the king of Syria, Ben-Hadad, gets upset, and he goes, okay, who's the snitch? Who's the spy? Somebody within my ranks is telling Israel everywhere we go. Now look at what happens. One of his servants says, no, it ain't us. It's Elisha. The prophet who is in Israel tells the king of Israel the words that you speak in your bedroom. So he said, well, go and get him. Where is he? He's in Dothan. Again, I'm paraphrasing a little bit. Just stay with me. Therefore he sent horses and chariots and a great army, and they came by night, and they surrounded the city. And when the servant of the man of God arose early and went out, there was an army surrounding the city with all of the horses and chariots. And his servant said to him, everybody, alas, my master, what shall we do? So he answered, he said, do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. And Elisha prayed and said that the Lord would open his eyes that he may see. And the Lord opened his eyes, and the young man saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha. Now, you guys realize that stuff like this only happens in the Old Testament. No. No, it's accounted in the Old Testament by faith and by what Elisha knew was going on around him. But guys, I wish on a daily basis that we would have our eyes open to know that we are not alone. That those that are for us, the God that is for us, is more than that which is coming against us. But it requires an incredible amount of spiritual discernment to be able to look into that which appears to be all lost and to be able to say, no, it's not all lost. You see, God is still on the throne. He's still moving. And guys, we've talked about many times about how we need to understand that the battle that we engage in is not a battle of flesh and blood, but it's a battle in the Spirit. And it's the spiritual things and the spiritual awareness that we have that are going to allow us to be able to understand how the battle is going. And you know what? There's times if we were to set a scale that we would say, oh, the battle is 70 or 80% spiritual, and maybe only 20 or 30% physical. Oh, and then there's other times maybe the battle is 80 or 90% physical. and yet only 20% or 10% spiritual. But the reality is there's going to be a component of both in everything that we do. And we talked a lot about how it is that we've got to keep on guard for the fact that if we're fighting everything in the physical, that we're going to get our clocks cleaned in the spiritual if we're not on top of realizing that we need to stay spiritually sharp. When we fail, it's because we've allowed ourselves to be caught up in the circumstances, caught up in the physical aspect of what's going on, and we fail to realize that it's the spiritual that's overwhelming us. You know what it looks like. A situation arises, there's a battle, there's a conflict, something's going bad in the marriage, something's going bad at work, something's bad at work or school, or something is just not going right, and all of a sudden we're surrounded and everything looks hopeless. And we say, alas, it's all over. Our first response most of the time is, well, we hook up with a battle plan. We start counting our ammunition. We inventory how much artillery we have. We start trying to figure out what our resources are so that we can come against that which is coming against us. And we start fighting. Very often we start engaging the enemy before we can even see them. We just start firing for effect. We just start getting to the place that we just start throwing anything out there in hopes that it will deflect what's coming at us, because what is coming at us, we realize and we recognize in time, is so overwhelming that we can't possibly survive or succeed. Oh, and then as almost a revelation, we think, maybe I should pray. Maybe I should call on others who can pray with me. Maybe I should take and turn into the things of the Lord and inquire of the Spirit of God to see if I'm even supposed to be in this battle to begin with. And all of a sudden, as if the curtain is pulled back, in the Spirit now we see God starting to move. We see things starting to shake loose. We see the tide of the battle starting to turn, because God is faithful to bring us through and to provide us the strength and provide us the things that we need in order to be able to grow through rather than go through that which stands against us. The sooner we look to the Spirit, the shorter the battle. The shorter the battle. When it starts, and when it starts to rage, and when you come to that place of saying, it's the time to pray. That's the clue. That's the signal as soon as you're overwhelmed, that we need to jump into the spiritual realm and seek out the Spirit of God who provides us with the strength that we need to endure. So when the Syrians, in verse 18, came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and said, strike these people, and I pray with blindness. And so he struck them with blindness. And Elisha winds up leading them right into the area and into the city of Samaria. They're all blind. And he goes, follow me, guys. And he grabs one and he has them all hold hands, and he walks this entire Syrian army right into the middle of Samaria. Look at the king. He's so thrilled. Should I kill him? Should I kill him? He asked twice. But Elisha answered him and said, don't kill him. He says, will you kill those that you've taken captive with your sword and your bow? Set food before them, let them eat, let them drink, and let them go to their master. Then he prepared a great feast, and after they ate and drank, he sent them away, and they went to their master. And so the bands of Syrian raiders came no more into the land of Israel. Until Ben-Hadad, as it happened, the king of Syria gathered all of his army, and he went up to besiege Samaria. And there was a great famine in Samaria, and indeed they besieged it until a donkey's head sold for 80 shekels of silver, and 1/4 of a cob, a dropping, if you will, of dove dew, sold for 5 shekels of silver. Then the king was passing on the wall, and a woman cried out to him, saying, help, my lord, O king. And he said, if the Lord does not help, where can I find help for you? Well, I find it on the threshing floor or in a wine press. And the king said to her, what's troubling you? What's your problem? And she answered and she said, this woman said to me, give your son that we may eat him today, and we'll eat my son tomorrow. So we boiled my son and we ate him. And I said to her on the next day, give your son so we may eat him, but she has hidden her son. And now it happened when the king heard these words of the woman that he tore his clothes. And as he passed by the wall, the people looked there underneath. He had sackcloth on his body. Then he said, God do to me and more also, if the head of Elisha, the son of Shaphat, remains upon him today. It's an amazing account of just how far people can go in blaming God and the servant of God for the trouble that they've brought into their own lives. Here the king is leading people into idolatry. He has turned away from God. He is doing the things that are completely an abomination before the Lord, and yet the farther that he runs away, the harder that it gets, and rather than running back to God, he starts to blame God, and then blame the people of God, and blame the messenger of God. It's sad how it is that people that run away and turn away from God very often will harden their hearts. And the farther that they turn, they've got to have somebody to blame. In ministry, it's a very common occurrence. It's one I wish that we could avoid. But there's times when somebody will choose a path to destruction and a means of trying to tell them that they're going in the wrong direction, and rather than joining in with the people of God, as we've learned a few weeks ago on Sunday morning about being covered by all, or above all covered, in order to be able to ward off the darts and the attacks of the enemies, they choose to run out into the wilderness on their own. And the whole while that they're out there, they're taking and talking about what they didn't receive, or what God didn't do, or what the people of God didn't do. And it's hard. It's quite a few years ago that we had a situation where it was just so devastating to the church here, because we had the very thing happened of what we see taking place here, in that there was somebody who was just so beloved that through the process of making bad decisions and bad choices and being afraid to stay the course that God had put him on, chose to go out and try to fix things on his own, and in so doing had to alienate everybody here at church, had to make enemies of those who had once been his best friends. Oh, and it was a hardship that the entire body went through. It was a time of just great heartbrokenness on behalf of all of those that wanted to see God get his way. And yet it didn't happen. And it still happens today. You've seen it in your own lives. You've seen it with people that you love, with family members maybe that you have tried so hard to lead in the ways of the Lord. And the problem doesn't become that they're sinners and they're destined for hell. The problems become that you are some overzealous Christian trying to berate them all the time. Has that ever happened to anybody but me? Things could not be more desperate. Gone to the point of killing their own babies for food. And yet, rather than confessing and repenting of their sin, they blame God and they blame his messenger. And folks, I don't think there could be a better parallel to what we see happening today as it pertains to the area of abortion in this country. Where millions upon millions upon millions of babies are being sacrificed, not as food. All their parts are being sold as an inventory for research, but being sold for the sake of convenience. Convenience. This is going to interfere with my lifestyle. This is going to take away my freedom. This is going to be the reason that I'm unable to be able to do that which I want to do. And what winds up happening is that we see a people that become so hard and so numb that rather than talking about the atrocity and looking to repent from sin based on the fact that there would be the inkling to even take and devour a baby, what they do is they argue and they bring down ridicule on those that bring it to their attention. And that's exactly what we see happening. I see there's no difference between the desperation of what was going on in Samaria as it was besieged by Syria as there is that's going on in America right now as we are being besieged by the enemy that is overcoming our ability to be able to reason as it pertains to that which is right and of God. And I believe that we're ripe now to the point for God's righteous judgment. And as a people, we need to be praying, and we need to be those that are prepared to share with those that are going to be suffering even more so than we. Verse 32, it says, but Elijah was sitting in his house, and the elders were sitting with him. And the king sent a man ahead of him. But before the messenger came in, he said to the elders, do you see this son of a murderer has sent somebody to take away my head? He said, look, when the messenger comes, shut the door and hold him. And is not the sound of his master's feet behind him. So what's happening here is the king sends down a messenger, an assassin, to kill Elisha. Elisha knows that it's coming. He says, when a guy gets here, open the door, let him in, and then hold on to him, because the king will be coming right behind him to see if it worked. Then Elisha said, you hear? Or no, I'm sorry, back up, 33. And while he was still talking to them, there was a messenger come to him. And then the king said, surely this calamity is from the Lord. Why should I wait on the Lord any longer? They hold the assassin. The king shows up and he says, surely the calamity is from the Lord. It's the first thing he got right. Surely it's the Lord that is bringing about these problems. Well, as a consequence, yeah. And why should I wait on the Lord any longer? And Elisha said, hear the word of the Lord. Thus says the Lord, tomorrow, about this time, a seah of fine flour shall be sold for a shekel, and 2 sheaves of barley for a shekel at the gate of Samaria. Now you've got to understand what Elisha is just saying here. He's saying that tomorrow, everything's going to be set right. As a matter of fact, there will be such abundance in the area of food and in flour and in barley that it's going to sell for a nickel compared to the thousands that the donkey's head was selling for. It's all going to change overnight. It's all going to be different. Look what the officer says. He says, so the officer whose hand the king leaned on answered the man of God and said, look, if the Lord would make windows in heaven, could this thing be? King sends an assassin. The plot fails. They hold the man at the door. The king comes in. He blames God. Elisha says, hey, God's going to make this thing all go away by tomorrow. And this captain of the guard, this chief military officer, he says, man, you are out of your mind. There is no way in the world that God can do that. If God was just to open up windows and dump stuff out, it couldn't happen like that. It's not going to happen. So often, we have a tendency to try to fix things or make them happen. But again, we only want to see them happen by our means. You see, the problem that this guy had is he had a very, very limited understanding, a limited view of what God can do. Now, I don't know about you guys, but there have been some pretty amazing things in my life, and I'm sure in yours as well, that God has done that absolutely just shocked you as to how it is that God brought it about. Again, our plans are always better than God's, and we would really love for God to follow our plan, because our plan is based on our intellect, our understanding, our ability to be able to control the situation and to make sure that however it comes about, that it comes about with just the exact... I am so glad that God has scrapped the majority of my plans in my life. I mean, in looking back on something, it's like, how stupid would that have been to have done that? And yet God showed up in a way that was just so crazy, so off the hook, so unordinary, unorthodox. But then isn't that exactly what God tells us? He says, my ways are not your ways. My understanding is far above your understanding. I love the place in Scripture where it says, and if you try to figure it out, you're just going to hurt yourself. Stop trying to figure it out. Stop trying to pigeonhole and put God into such a box. And guys, the reason that this is so important is because there's so many times that people will come to me over and over and over again and they'll say, God is, I don't think I can trust God, or I can't believe in God because I've been praying for Him to fix this and He hasn't. Well, what are you praying for Him to do? Well, I want Him to follow steps 1 through 10, double check 10, and then move 11 through 15, and as soon as He checks all of the boxes and everything works out exactly like my plan is, then I'll consider that God is actually on my side. And guys, here's the thing. We're going to see in just a moment that I believe that when we don't open ourselves up to let God be God in the resolution of problems, that what happens is that we can miss out and not see His solution. Does He withhold it? I believe sometimes he does. I believe sometimes that we work ourselves out of the solution that he had for us by our lack of faith. Certainly what's going to happen to this guy. Look at what it says. And he says, and in fact, Elisha speaking to the officer, you're going to see it with your eyes, but you're not going to eat it. Now, there were 4 leprous men at the entrance of the gate. And one said to the other, why are we sitting here until we die? If we say we will enter the city, the famine is in the city, and we're going to die. If we sit here, we die. Therefore, let us go surrender to the army of the Syrians, and if they keep us alive, we live. If they kill us, oh well, we were going to die anyway. Now, what's really interesting, it's not in Scripture, but rabbinic tradition says that this was Gehazi and his 3 sons. That's interesting. Like I said, it's not Scripture, but I mean, it's a tradition. It's how it's taught, how the rabbis teach it, that this was Gehazi and his 3 sons. And they rose up at twilight to go to the camp of the Syrians. And when they got there on the outskirts of the camp, they were surprised no one was there. For the Lord had caused the army of the Syrians to hear a noise, the noise of chariots and horses, the noise of a great army. So they said to one another, look, Israel has hired against us the king of the Hittites and the king of the Egyptians to come and attack us. Therefore they rose and they fled at twilight and left the camp intact, their tents, their horses, their donkeys, and they fled for their lives. And when these lepers came to the outskirts of the camp, they went into one tent, and they drank, and they ate, and they carried from it silver and gold and clothing, and they went and hid them. Then they came back, and they entered another tent, and they carried some more away, and they went and hid it. And then one said to the other, you know what? It's probably not right for us to keep this to ourselves. If we wait until morning light, some punishment is sure to come. We better go tell somebody about this, because if we just keep going in there and taking advantage of this, something bad's going to happen. And so they went and they called the gatekeeper of the city, and they told him what had happened. And the Syrian camp was empty, and no one was there, not a human sound, only horses and donkeys and tents. And the gatekeeper went and told the king, and here's the interesting thing. The king, who had just heard from Elisha the night before that everything was going to be made right in the morning, by this time tomorrow everything's going to be fine, he says it's a trick. It's a trick. They know that we're starving to death, and so they're hiding in the woods. They left all that stuff there, and as soon as we run out, they're going to come and they're going to take over the city, and so it's a trick. And so some of the servants of the king answered and said, okay, let us take the 5 remaining horses. Let us take what we have left, a few resources we have, and let's track down these guys and let's find out what's really going on. And so they start making their way to the Jordan, and as they're going along the road that leads to the Jordan River, they start seeing sandals and swords and clothing and items that were just discarded by this army as they ran the other direction to be able to flee and get across the Jordan River. And so they go back and they report to the king, and they say, hey, guess what? They're right. They're gone. And there's no reason for us to be afraid. And so all of a sudden there's the opportunity for them to go and to find all of this plunder, all of this that was left down in the camp. And surely these 2 seahs of barley sold for a shekel, and a seah of fine flour for a shekel was sold at that same time. And listen what happens. This is the thing that's so interesting. The officer that had answered the man of God, we're in verse 19, said, look, if the Lord would make windows, or they said, if the Lord would make windows, not as such a thing could happen. And he said, in fact, you'll see with your own eyes. And so it happened to him, for the people trampled him in the gate, and he died. When the word came to the city that they could go down and they could take the spoil from the camp, he was standing at the city gate. And he looked down and he saw the camp, and it was completely empty, and he went, woohoo! And the gate opened up, and they ran him smooth over and trampled him to death. Be careful. Now it came to pass that at the end of 7 years, that the woman that returned from the land of the Philistines, and she went up and made an appeal to the king for her house and her land. Then the king was talking to Gehazi, the servant of the man of God, and he said, tell me please of the great things that Elisha has done. And now it happened as he was telling the king how he had restored the dead life, that there was a woman whose son was restored to life, and appealing to the king for her house, or she was the same one appealing to the king for her house and land, that Gehazi said, my lord, O king, this is the woman, and this is her son, whom Elisha restored. And when the king asked the woman, she told him. So the king appointed a certain officer, and her land was restored. You remember the Shunammite woman who's put up the room for Elisha, and he would go and he would stay. And the only thing that she was lacking was a son, and so she was granted by God a son, and the son died, and he was brought back to life. Well, prior to the famine, Elisha tells her, hey, you need to split, and you need to leave town because there's going to be a famine. It's going to get really hard in the land. And she went down and lived in the region of the Philistines. Now, 7 years later, she comes back, and it's time for her to be reestablished in the land, but somebody's taken over her land. And so she goes to make an appeal to the king, and it just happens to be the time that Gehazi is telling the king about the exploits of Elisha. And there was this woman, and this son that died, and he was brought back to life. Hey, there she is! Just happened. And so Elisha went to Damascus, and Ben-Hadad of Syria was sick, and it was told to him, saying, the man of God has come here. And the king said to Hazael, take and present yourself to him, and meet the man of God, and inquire of the Lord, and say, shall I recover from this disease? So Hazael went to meet him, and he took a present of every good thing in Damascus, 40 camel loads. And he came and he stood before him and said, your son Ben-Hadad, king of Syria, has sent me to you, saying, shall I recover? To paraphrase the end of the chapter, Elisha says to him, yes, you can tell him that he's going to recover. He says the problem, though, is that he's also going to die. This servant, Hazael, asked why it was that this was so upsetting to Elisha, and he said, because I've seen what evil you will do to the children of Israel. Their strongholds you will set on fire. Their young men you will kill with the sword, and you'll dash their children. You'll rip open the women with child. Hazael got upset, and he says, what am I, a dog, that I would do these gross things? And Elisha says, no, what's going to happen is you're going to be the next king over Syria. You're going to be the one that's going to take the place of Ben-Hadad. And not only would he take the place of Ben-Hadad, but he would be the one that would bring it about, because the reality was that he went back. His master would have recovered, but instead of allowing to recover, he took a wet cloth and he dampened it so that he couldn't breathe, and he held it over the face of Ben-Hadad until he died. And then he assumed the throne of Syria. (16) through the end of the chapter gives us a chronology of different kings and different times that were happening, and it's just a catch-up on who was ruling at what particular time. And it ends with us seeing that we are at that place of having two Jehorims ruling, both in the north and in the south. You guys can read it. I'm not going to labor it tonight. It's just a bunch of names and a bunch of places and a bunch of things. So you guys read that. We'll continue next week in chapter 9. I encourage you to read ahead.